Landon Hale had built an empire of billions, yet every night he ate alone in the silent penthouse high above New York City. His world had narrowed to work, routine, and the quiet he never learned to escape after losing his hearing as a child. But everything shifted the moment a 4-year-old girl wandered into his dining room, Ellie Delgado, the daughter of his cleaning lady. And with her came the first spark of warmth his life had seen in years. Landon Hale had built the kind of empire most people only read about on front-page business articles, tech campuses in 3 states, private jet waiting on standby, and a net worth that put him on every list that celebrated the wealthy and untouchable. Yet none of it changed the fact that every night he returned to a penthouse perched above the city like a glass fortress, and ate dinner at a table meant for 8 with only 1 occupied seat. He never bothered turning on the TV, never played music, never filled the space with anything except the soft hum of the vac system and the occasional distant honk drifting up from the streets below. His home was beautiful, expansive, and admired by every magazine that photographed it. But to him it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a place he existed in out of habit. It was a life that had become so routine, so predictable, that it blurred into one long stretch of days that looked too much alike. His hearing loss had shaped more of his world than he ever admitted, even to himself. Conversations required effort, work meetings demanded constant concentration, and social events exhausted him in ways no one around him seemed to understand. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped trying to force himself into spaces that never felt built for him. It wasn't that people ignored him, they simply didn't know how to meet him halfway. They spoke too fast, mumbled through their words, or avoided direct communication altogether, and Landon saw the same pattern repeat itself over and over, from business partners to dates that never turned into anything more. Eventually, he grew comfortable keeping people at a distance. Being left out stung less when you expected nothing. But there was another truth beneath all of that: he preferred control. In his penthouse, he controlled every variable: the pace, the expectations, the interactions. Out there, the world demanded he keep up with its rhythm. In here, he set the rhythm himself. He convinced everyone, including himself, that solitude was a choice he made deliberately. It was easier than admitting it sometimes felt like the only option granted to him. Work filled most of the void. Halitech consumed his hours from sunrise to well past midnight. He thrived on the intensity: product launches, board meetings, acquisitions, endless negotiations. The company gave him purpose, direction, and an identity that didn't revolve around the limitations of his hearing. He was admired for his innovation, feared for his precision, and respected for the empire he had built from nothing but a brilliant mind and relentless determination. And yet, even on the most triumphant days, when stock prices soared and analysts praised his leadership, he still returned to his penthouse and sat down to a dinner prepared hours earlier by a chef who never stayed long enough to serve it. The moment he stepped inside, the energy of the city outside faded, leaving him with the awareness that everything he'd built existed everywhere except within these walls. Landon kept a tight schedule, one engineered to keep him busy enough not to dwell on anything deeper. He awoke early, exercised, reviewed his morning briefings, and headed to work. Nights were the same. He ate, reviewed next day tasks, and buried himself in data until fatigue forced him to bed. He never questioned the routine because it served its purpose. It prevented him from thinking too much. It kept him focused on facts, numbers, and results rather than the ache of coming home to a life with no one to greet him. His penthouse reflected this carefully curated emptiness. Every piece of furniture was elegant, modern, and arranged with meticulous attention. Yet not a single photo hung on the walls, no childhood mementos sat on shelves, and nothing in the space suggested it belonged to a man who loved, laughed, or lived for anything besides productivity. Even his dining table, a massive walnut piece imported from Italy, remained pristine due to lack of use. Most nights he didn't even bother plating the food. He simply ate what was there, methodically and without feeling, as if nourishment were merely another box he needed to check off his daily list. The people who worked for him noticed, of course. His assistant often wondered if he had friends. His board members assumed his devotion to the company was simply part of what made him exceptional. But no one really knew him well enough to question why he withdrew the moment a meeting ended, or why he avoided company events, where small talk took precedence over strategy. He wasn't rude, just unavailable, unreachable in ways that nobody challenged. And despite everything, Landon wasn't unhappy. Not exactly. He had gotten used to the way his world functioned. He lived in an efficient balance between work and isolation, one that protected him from risking anything that might break him open. The few attempts he had made at romance in the past had fizzled quickly, leaving him more convinced each time that some people simply weren't made for ordinary love. He told himself he didn't need it, didn't miss it, didn't think about it. He repeated those beliefs often enough that they began to feel true. But there were evenings when he found himself pausing before sitting down at the long dining table, noticing the stretch of it, the space around it, the hollowness of having so much and sharing none of it. He'd shake the feeling off quickly, he always did, but it lingered somewhere beneath the surface. A quiet question he never voiced: was this really all there was for him? The truth was that Landon had mastered the art of appearing complete from the outside. He wore confidence like armor, success like a shield. But inside, there existed a part of him that had long grown tired of being unreachable, tired of watching life happen around him without taking part in any of it. He had learned to adapt, yes, he had learned to thrive even. But he had not learned how to let anyone in. That part still felt impossible, too vulnerable, too risky. And so on an ordinary Thursday evening, Landon sat down to another solitary dinner in his perfectly curated home, believing the night would pass exactly like all the others. He had no idea that life was about to shift, not through a business deal or a technological breakthrough, but through something much smaller and infinitely more powerful, a moment he never saw coming and a person he never expected to matter. Everything he thought he understood about his world was only one heartbeat away from changing forever. Landon Hale's hearing loss didn't define him publicly, but privately it shaped nearly every layer of his existence. It changed the way he communicated, the way he thought, the way he prepared himself before stepping into any room where other people existed. Growing up, he learned to read lips because teachers forgot to face him. He learned to anticipate conversations because classmates rarely repeated themselves. He learned to smile and nod at the right moments because admitting he hadn't heard something only brought irritation or pity. As an adult, things didn't improve much. Corporate partners assumed he heard less because he understood less, and dates mistook his quietness for disinterest. With time, he realized that withdrawing was easier than explaining, and avoiding crowds was easier than navigating them. The world ran on quick exchanges, overlapping talk, and constant noise, and Landon always felt one step offset from it. The distance had become second nature for him. He compensated with discipline. Before every meeting, he reviewed notes twice, sometimes 3 times, so he wouldn't need anyone to repeat information. He trained himself to watch expressions, to read gestures, to study the rhythm of conversation rather than rely solely on sound. People admired him for his ability to process information faster than anyone in the room, never realizing that speed came from spending a lifetime trying to keep up with what he missed. He never complained, not even internally. He carried the challenges like a pack he no longer felt the weight of because he had worn it for decades. Yet despite all his skill and adaptation, there were moments, rare but sharp, when he felt like an outsider observing life rather than participating in it. Social events were the worst for him. Networking dinners where guests talked over one another made his focus strain, turning words into blurred approximations. Charity galas filled with echoing chatter reminded him how quickly he could lose track of conversations if someone turned their head or covered their mouth while speaking. Whenever he attended these events, he stood at the edges, scanning faces rather than listening to voices, piecing together meaning from expressions alone. Most people assumed he was simply aloof or too wealthy to bother engaging. No one realized how exhausting it was just to be present in those environments. His assistant once suggested he bring an interpreter or rely on closed caption technology through an earpiece, but Landon rejected the idea. He didn't want accommodations that highlighted what set him apart. He preferred blending in, even if blending in meant standing alone. Romantic connections proved even more complicated. He had dated a few times in his 20s, fewer in his 30s, and by 40 he'd nearly given up trying. People wanted effortless conversation. They wanted spontaneity. They wanted to talk without thinking about volume or enunciation. They didn't want to repeat themselves 3 times during dinner. Landon understood that. He never blamed them. But each failed attempt added another brick to the wall he quietly built around his life. It wasn't that he believed he was unlovable. He simply believed that loving him required a patience most people didn't naturally have, and one he never wanted to ask for. Over time, he convinced himself that companionship was overrated, that relationships were messy, unpredictable, and filled with expectations that he had no energy to meet. His hearing loss also shaped his leadership style. At Halitech headquarters, he demanded clarity. Employees were trained to present information in organized formats, avoid talking over one another, and keep discussions structured. Many thought he was strict to others found comfort in the order he required. No one knew the real reason for his rules. Efficiency wasn't just a preference, it was survival. If a meeting became chaotic, he risked missing key points and exposing what he considered a vulnerability. He valued competence above all else, not because he enjoyed rigid structure, but because it protected him from being misunderstood. That discipline trickled into his personal life as well. He ran his days like a machine, cut out distractions, and avoided unpredictable situations. It was a lifestyle built to minimize error and uncertainty. Yet beneath all of that control lay something far simpler. He didn't want to burden anyone. He refused to ask for patience, refused to disrupt anyone's comfort for his own needs. That belief had followed him since childhood, ingrained by teachers who sighed, classmates who shrugged, coworkers who spoke too fast, and women who grew tired of repeating themselves. He told himself he didn't need anyone to adjust for him, that surviving on his own terms made him stronger. But strength had a way of turning into isolation before he noticed. He often wondered what his life might have looked like if he hadn't lost most of his hearing. Maybe he would have been more outgoing. Maybe he would have traveled more with friends, or attended concerts, or made memories that weren't tied to boardrooms and achievement charts. Maybe he would have let someone love him without worrying whether they'd eventually run out of patience. These questions visited him rarely, but when they did, they lingered like shadows at the edge of his thoughts. He always shook them off quickly, reminding himself that imagining a different version of his life was pointless. He had what he had, and he had worked for every bit of it. Still, whether he admitted it or not, the loss shaped his solitude. People believed billionaires stayed private because of status. For Landon, privacy was a refuge. In his penthouse, he didn't have to strain to hear or monitor body language. He didn't have to guess at a conversation or pretend he understood something he didn't. He didn't have to manage the frustration of others. He could move through the rooms without feeling like he was one step behind everyone else. He found comfort in environments where communication wasn't demanded of him. And yet even within that refuge, there were moments when he wished quietly, privately for something more. For a voice directed at him not with impatience but genuine interest. For someone who didn't treat communication with him as a task but as a connection. For a presence that filled the emptiness of his home not with noise but with life. He didn't articulate these hopes, even in his mind. They were vague, unshaped things he tucked away before they could grow strong enough to hurt. His housekeeper, his driver, his assistant, none of them knew the depth of his withdrawal. They saw a man who chose solitude because he preferred efficiency. They didn't see the man who unconsciously avoided family gatherings because keeping up with rapid conversations made him feel lost. They didn't see the man who sometimes ate lunch alone in his office because coordinating a conversation in a noisy restaurant required more effort than he could afford during a packed day. They didn't see the man who replayed snippets of conversations in his head after meetings, making sure he hadn't misunderstood anything. He mastered the art of appearing composed, collected, and unaffected. He had spent his entire adult life working on that performance. It wasn't until much later, after the moment when a small, unexpected visitor wandered into his world, that Landon would finally understand the deeper truth. His hearing loss hadn't taken his life from him. It had simply kept him waiting for the person who would speak to him without rushing, who would reach for him without hesitation, who would connect with him without requiring perfection or clarity. Someone who understood communication wasn't always about sound. Someone who, with a single bright question and a fearless smile, would remind him that connection could come from places he never even thought to look. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. For now, Landon lived inside the world shaped by years of guarded habits, unaware that everything he believed about his limitations and his loneliness was only temporary, only a prelude to something far more extraordinary than anything he had known. Ellie Delgado had worked for dozens of wealthy clients over the years, but none of them resembled the life that surrounded Landon Hale. The penthouse on the Upper East Side wasn't just large, it felt like stepping into a museum curated by someone who cared about precision more than comfort. Everything gleamed: marble floors that reflected light like water, glass walls that framed the skyline as if it were part of the decor, and furniture so pristine she sometimes wondered if anyone actually used it. Rosa wasn't intimidated by luxuries, she was intimidated by the emptiness of it. The place looked like it had been built by a man who had forgotten what personal touches even were. Still, she did her job with the same care she brought to every home she cleaned. Her daughter Ellie was always nearby, usually coloring in a corner or humming softly to herself while Rosa worked. Today had been different. The babysitter canceled last minute, and Rosa, working paycheck to paycheck, had no choice but to bring Ellie along. She prayed that the little girl would stick to the kitchen area, where Rosa set up a tiny PlayStation for her, but Ellie had curiosity baked into her bones. It wasn't misbehavior, it was the energy of a child who found wonder in everything. Rosa tried to focus on wiping down countertops and loading the dishwasher, but her ears stayed tuned to Ellie's soft chatter behind her. She wasn't worried about Ellie breaking anything. The child had a surprising amount of respect for other people's belongings. What she feared was Ellie wandering into places she shouldn't be, like the private office or the gym, or worst of all, the dining room where Hale sometimes ate before she even realized he was home. Rosa respected boundaries with an almost religious fervor. In her line of work, one mistake, one crossed line could cost her everything. Jobs like this didn't appear easily, not with her background, not with her circumstances, and definitely not in a city where rent was a beast she fought every month. Still, Ellie had her own mind. Rosa turned her back for less than a minute, long enough to scrub a stubborn stain on the stove. When she looked again, Ellie's stool was empty, her crayons abandoned in a scattered rainbow. A bolt of panic shot through Rosa as she wiped her hands on her apron and scanned the kitchen. Nothing. She checked the hallway, the laundry room, even opened the pantry just in case. Ellie wasn't anywhere. Her heart drummed against her ribs as she hurried toward the dining area, praying the child hadn't gone far. She whispered Ellie's name under her breath, each step quicker than the last. Her mind raced with the consequences. What if Ellie bothered him? What if she made a mess? What if she startled him? What if this was the moment her life fell apart over something she couldn't take back? Meanwhile, Ellie had wandered down the long hallway with the same curiosity that made Rosa both proud and exhausted. To Ellie, the penthouse was a castle, tall ceilings, shiny floors, long hallways echoing her tiny footsteps. She wasn't used to spaces like this. Her home in Queens was barely bigger than Mr. Hale's living room. She lived with less space, less light, less of everything, but never less love. Her mother worked endlessly to make sure of that. Ellie admired the artwork on the walls, though she didn't understand it. She liked the way the colors blended, like someone had smudged paint on purpose. She imagined living here, running through rooms bigger than playgrounds. She imagined having a man like Mr. Hale come home every day to find her waiting. She didn't know much about him except that he always said hello to her mother with a nod and never raised his voice. In Ellie's world, that already made him special. She rounded the corner into the massive dining room and stopped in her tracks when she saw him. Landon was seated at the far end of an oversized table with a plate in front of him. He looked up the moment she appeared in the doorway. Ellie froze for half a second, deciding whether she had made a huge mistake or discovered something worth exploring. She chose exploring. She always chose exploring. Landon wasn't sure what to do at first. Children rarely entered his orbit. He spent his life among executives, engineers, lawyers, and investors. Kids were a foreign concept to him. But when Ellie stepped farther into the room, holding a pink lunchbox pressed against her chest, he felt something shift inside, a kind of gentle disruption he couldn't explain. She didn't hesitate the way adults did around him. She didn't choose her words carefully or glance nervously toward his hearing device. She simply existed in his space with a natural sense of belonging he hadn't seen in years. Ellie pointed at his plate. "You were eating by yourself?" she asked, tilting her head the way curious children do when trying to understand the world. The question struck him deeper than she could ever know. He nodded slowly. Ellie frowned, concerned for reasons that had nothing to do with social etiquette. She didn't care about wealth or status or the cold perfection of his apartment. She cared that someone had no one to sit with. To Ellie, that was the saddest thing in the world. Landon opened his mouth to respond, but before he could form a full sentence, Ellie climbed up onto the nearest chair as if she had been invited. She didn't ask permission. She looked at him with bright brown eyes and asked, "Can I eat here?" As if the answer should obviously be yes, Landon felt something warm flicker unexpectedly in his chest. No board member, no business partner, no admirer had ever asked him a question with that kind of earnestness. She wasn't trying to get anything from him. She wasn't performing politeness. She genuinely wanted to sit with him as though he were someone worth sitting with. His hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before he found himself nodding. He didn't know why he agreed. He didn't stop to analyze it. Something about her presence softened edges inside him he didn't even know were sharp. And just as Ellie began opening her lunchbox, burst into the room, breathless, terrified, and already apologizing before she fully saw the scene in front of her. She expected disaster. Instead, she saw her daughter sitting beside the wealthiest man she had ever met, chatting as if they were old friends. Rosa's face flushed with embarrassment and fear. She tried to pull Ellie away, stumbling through apologies, but Landon raised a hand gently, not to command, but to reassure. He told her it was fine, that Ellie wasn't bothering him, that he didn't mind her being there. Rosa froze, completely unprepared for that response. She had never heard kindness from a man of his position spoken so plainly. She didn't understand why he wasn't upset. She didn't understand why he even cared. But Landon watched Ellie with a tenderness that shocked her. It wasn't romantic or inappropriate, it was the expression of a man who had been starved for something simple and human. A presence. A connection, someone who saw him not as a billionaire, but as a person. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, the one she'd tried so hard to prevent, was the very moment that would change the lives of all three of them. Rosa stood frozen for a breath too long, her hand still wrapped around Ellie's arm, as if she could rewind the moment and undo her daughter's boldness. She had imagined countless worst-case scenarios before entering that dining room, angry, shouting, immediate termination, security escorting her out, but never this. Never the sight of Landon Hale, the untouchable billionaire whose life seemed carved from marble. Watching her daughter with something almost gentle in his expression, she couldn't comprehend it. Men like him did not sit at tables with children of housekeepers. They didn't bend their attention toward little girls with messy ponytails and mismatched socks. And they certainly didn't allow a child to pull up a chair at their meticulously set dining tables. Rosa's instinct was to apologize again, to explain, to take the blame and flee, but her voice tangled before it could escape. She braced herself for the reprimand she expected at any moment. But Landon spoke before she could gather a single coherent word. "It's okay," he said, his tone calm, steady, and so unexpectedly warm that it disarmed her completely. "She's fine." He didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't shift uncomfortably, didn't reach for a manager or a set of rules to enforce. Instead, he looked at Ellie like she was making his evening better rather than disrupting it. Rosa wasn't used to that kind of response. She had worked in dozens of luxury homes, and nearly all of them carried the same unspoken rule: of children of staff were to remain invisible. Anything less risked accusations of unprofessionalism or overfamiliarity. But here, Ellie had not only been seen, she had been welcomed. Rosa knelt next to her daughter, her heartbeat still climbing. "My Emmer, you can't just run off," she whispered, trying not to sound as frantic as she felt. But before she could coax Ellie down from the chair, her daughter leaned toward Landon, smiling in that open, fearless way only 4-year-olds were capable of. "I brought my lunchbox," Ellie announced proudly, holding it up as though she were offering a treasure. "Do you want to see what's inside?" Landon blinked, taken aback by her enthusiasm, but something in him softened even further. "Sure," he said, the words slipping out before he could question why he was entertaining the idea. Ellie opened the box with dramatic flair, revealing half a peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, and 2 cookies shaped like stars. She explained each item as if presenting a gourmet feast. "My mom made the sandwich. She makes the best ones," Ellie declared with complete confidence. Then she pointed at the cookies. "These are for good days. Today was a good day." Landon nodded as if this logic made perfect sense, and Rosa stared at him, stunned that he was entertaining her daughter's chatter. She felt an unexpected ache in her chest at the sight, something between pride and fear, because she had never seen a man of his status treat her daughter like an equal. Landon didn't fully understand what compelled him to remain seated rather than retreat into the emotional distance he relied on. He didn't usually invite interaction. Conversation drained him, and children, he had absolutely no experience with them. Yet Ellie didn't make him feel overwhelmed. She didn't speak in ways that required him to decode intention or strain to keep up. She talked with clarity and a sense of trust that bypassed every defense he had built. He noticed Rosa still kneeling beside her daughter, tension radiating from her posture, as though waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't want her to feel that way. He didn't want her to fear him. "She can stay," he said, looking directly at Rosa now. "If you're okay with it." The simple statement knocked the breath from her lungs. She wasn't accustomed to being asked what she was comfortable with. Employers usually announced expectations, not invitations. And if she were being honest, she didn't know how to answer. Part of her wanted to whisk Ellie out of the room to preserve boundaries she relied on for survival. But another part, the part that saw the way Landon's shoulders had relaxed, the way Ellie's presence had breathed something alive into him, hesitated. "Only if she behaves," Rosa managed, her voice steadying. Ellie nodded vigorously, swinging her legs under the table. "I can be good," she promised, even though the sparkle in her eyes suggested she had her own definition of the word. Rosa finally stood, unsure of whether to resume her cleaning or keep watch. She hovered by the doorway at first, wiping her palms on her apron as if trying to rub away the nerves still pulsing through her. From her vantage point, she watched the interaction unfold. A billionaire, who rarely looked at anyone longer than necessary, listening as a 4-year-old explained the importance of star-shaped cookies. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been happening. And yet, there was an undeniable tenderness to it that Rosa couldn't ignore. Ellie kept talking, filling the space with stories about press school, her favorite stuffed animal, and how she wanted to be a firefighter or a fairy princess. She hadn't decided which one yet. Landon found himself responding, offering small nods, quiet smiles, and the occasional question that surprised even him. He felt no pressure with her. No expectation, no judgment. She didn't care how wealthy he was or how many companies he owned. She didn't care about his hearing or the way he sometimes needed an extra moment to process speech. She simply liked him. And that feeling, pure, uncomplicated, undeserved, took root in a place inside him he thought had long since withered. For Rosa, the moment was far more complex. Watching her daughter grow attached to someone so far removed from their world terrified her. Ellie didn't understand social lines or power imbalances. She didn't know what it meant to trust someone who could end their stability with a single decision. Rosa understood all too well. She had been burned before by employers who claimed kindness but punished mistakes harshly, by people who used her vulnerability against her. She didn't want her daughter to learn those lessons too early. She didn't want Landon Hale to be another disappointment, another reminder of the gulf between their lives. Yet, the more she watched him, the harder it became to cling to her fears. Landon didn't look inconvenienced. He didn't look impatient. He didn't look like a man performing politeness out of obligation. He looked invested, present, as if Ellie had cracked open a window in a house he'd kept sealed for years, letting air rush in whether he wanted it or not. Rosa tried to pull her gaze away from him, from the strange warmth building in the room, but something about the scene held her captive. It felt like watching the first spark of something impossible, something she didn't dare name. When Ellie finally took a bite of her sandwich, she offered the other half to Landon. Rosa's breath caught, anticipating his rejection. But instead he smiled, a real smile, subtle but unmistakable. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, and he accepted it. The gesture was small, almost insignificant in the grand scale of his life, but Rosa recognized the weight of it instantly. In her world, sharing food was an act of trust, of closeness. She hadn't expected to see that here, not in the home of a man who lived behind emotional barricades. She certainly hadn't expected him to receive it with appreciation rather than discomfort. The realization came slowly but undeniably. Ellie had done in minutes what no board member, no investor, no admirer had ever accomplished. She had reached him, not through influence or charm or intention, but through honesty. And Landon Hale, a man who kept everyone at a distance, had let her. Rosa stood at the threshold of the dining room, watching them, feeling the ground subtly shift beneath her. Something had begun, something she couldn't define, couldn't control, and couldn't stop even if she wanted to. Ellie's determination to stay in that chair surprised everyone in the room, everyone except Ellie herself. She swung her legs happily, crunching on an apple slice as though she had been dining with billionaires her entire life. To her, there was nothing strange about this moment. She liked Landon, Landon liked her, and that was enough logic for a 4-year-old. But to Rosa, the sight was nearly impossible to process. She kept expecting the atmosphere to shift, for Landon to pull back, for reality to remind them of the boundaries she spent years learning to respect. Yet nothing shifted. The only person struggling with the situation was Rosa herself. Landon watched Ellie with a level of attention Rosa had never seen him give anyone. Most adults, even good-natured ones, tended to talk over children or humor them with half-interest. But Landon listened to Ellie as if every word mattered. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't performing courtesy. It was as though her presence, full of color and movement, drew out something in him he had forgotten he possessed. He responded to her questions, nodded seriously when she spoke, and even asked a few things in return, gentle things, curious things. "What's your favorite thing to draw?" he asked at one point, and Ellie perked up instantly. "Animals, and my mom. And sometimes the sky when it looks pink, but mostly animals." She paused, then added proudly, "I'm really good at drawing cats. Want to see?" Before Rosa could intervene, Ellie hopped off the chair and ran back to the kitchen, returning with a crinkled sheet of paper covered in colorful scribbles. She handed it to Landon like it was priceless art. He studied it carefully, his brows lifting in genuine appreciation. "This is good," he said, tapping the drawing lightly. "Really good." Ellie's entire face lit up. "I know." Rosa pressed her lips together to stifle a laugh. Ellie's confidence was a force she could never tame, no matter how hard she tried. What caught Rosa off guard wasn't her daughter's boldness, it was Landon's reaction. He didn't laugh at Ellie's pride or dismiss her drawing as childish. He treated it with the same seriousness he might give to a product prototype at Halitech. That small gesture, his willingness to see her as someone worth listening to, tugged at something deep in Rosa, something she wasn't ready to name. She stepped back toward the kitchen, giving them space but keeping them in sight. Her heart still hammered against her ribs from the adrenaline of earlier, yet a new feeling began pushing through the anxiety, curiosity. Who was this man, really? She had known only the version the world talked about, the billionaire genius, the untouchable CEO, the master strategist. But the man sitting at the table with her daughter wasn't any of those things. He wasn't calculating or distant. He wasn't unreachable. He was strangely human, more human than most people she had met in her life. She watched as Ellie peppered him with questions. Why do you wear that thing on your ear? Do you like sandwiches? Do you have a dog? Why is your house so big? Have you ever fallen off a chair? Each one earned a small, amused reaction from Landon, but when she asked about his hearing device, Rosa stiffened. She opened her mouth to stop Ellie, to apologize, to redirect, but Landon lifted his hand slightly, signaling that he didn't mind. It helps me hear, he said simply. Ellie nodded thoughtfully. My grandma wears glasses so she can see things when they're blurry. Landon smiled softly. Yeah, kind of like that. Ellie accepted the explanation without hesitation and moved on to the next topic. Rosa exhaled slowly. There had been no awkwardness, no discomfort, just understanding formed in the simplest way. Little by little, Rosa began relaxing, though she kept her distance. She wiped down the counter again, even though it was already spotless. She rearranged a stack of napkins. She found meaningless tasks to occupy her hands because the alternative was acknowledging the strange warmth growing inside her chest as she watched her daughter and her employer interact like two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The situation was dangerous emotionally, professionally, socially. She knew that. She reminded herself repeatedly. But the image of her daughter laughing at something Landon said made the warnings in her mind soften at the edges. Ellie finished her sandwich and took one of the star-shaped cookies from her lunchbox. She stared at it for a moment, then slowly pushed it across the table toward Landon. You can have this one, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. It's my best one. Rosa nearly gasped. Ellie never gave away her best cookie. She didn't share cookies at all. They were her treasure, her little reward system for days that felt good. The fact that she offered one to Landon told Rosa everything she needed to know. Ellie had already decided she loved him. Landon hesitated, not because he didn't want it, but because he understood the significance of the offer. Children didn't hide their affection behind politeness. Their generosity meant something. He glanced at Rosa quickly, almost asking for permission, and Rosa found herself nodding without thinking. When he took the cookie, Ellie beamed so brightly it felt like she had lit up the entire room. He bit into it, and though he wasn't much of a sweets person, he smiled. It's perfect, he told her. And Ellie, delighted by the approval, mirrored his smile so fiercely that Rosa felt her heart twist at the sight. This moment shouldn't have existed, not in the world they lived in, where wealth and poverty rarely touched without consequence. And yet it did. It existed in a fragile space where honesty and trust grew like sunlight sneaking through a window no one realized had been cracked open. Landon hadn't expected anything from this day. He hadn't expected conversation. He hadn't expected connection. And he certainly hadn't expected a child to walk into his life and make him feel present. Rosa swallowed hard, gripping the counter as she watched. She felt gratitude, confusion, and fear all at once. Gratitude that Landon wasn't the cold employer she once imagined. Confusion at how naturally Ellie took to him. And fear, deep and instinctive, that this small spark of connection could one day turn into pain for her, for Ellie, for all of them. She had learned long ago that good moments often came with shadows. But despite that fear, she couldn't deny the truth blooming quietly inside her. Something had shifted in this home tonight. Something neither she nor Landon could take back. Ellie leaned toward Landon with a grin that showed the tiniest gap where a baby tooth was beginning to loosen. Can I sit with you again next time? She asked without hesitation. Rosa inhaled sharply, ready to step in, ready to apologize, ready to lower her daughter's expectations. But Landon beat her to it. Yeah, he said softly, almost instinctively, I'd like that. The room didn't change, but the atmosphere did, imperceptibly at first, then unmistakably. Rosa felt it settle over them, a shift, a possibility, a ripple in the calm patterns of Landon's isolated life. Something new had begun, something neither of them fully understood yet. And as she stood at the edge of the room, watching her daughter fit so effortlessly into Landon's world, Rosa realized with a tremor of both hope and fear that the evening had rewritten something within all three of them. Rosa returned to wiping the counters even though they were already spotless, her hands moving automatically while her eyes drifted back to the dining room every few seconds. She couldn't help it. No matter how many years she'd spent training herself to stay invisible in the homes of the wealthy, something about this moment kept pulling her attention. Landon wasn't just allowing Ellie to stay, he was engaging with her, leaning in when she spoke, nodding with interest as she explained the elaborate backstory of her stuffed rabbit, Skippy. Rosa watched them with a mixture of disbelief and something warmer, something she didn't want to name too quickly. She kept reminding herself that this was a one-time exception, a strange moment brought on by surprise and the natural charm of her daughter. Yet the longer she looked at Landon, the less she believed that. From his seat at the table, Landon found himself studying Rosa when she turned away, observing how she moved with efficient precision, how she handled everything with quiet competence. He'd noticed her before in passing, in fragments, in the way one notices someone who performs well and never asks for more than her role permits. But tonight he saw her differently. He saw the tension in her posture, the quick glances she sent toward her daughter, the protective edge in every movement. He understood it more than she realized. He knew what it was to brace for disappointment, to expect rejection, to prepare for things falling apart. But he wasn't disappointed, not in Ellie, not in Rosa, not in this unexpected shift in his evening. Instead, he felt strangely grounded by it, almost as if their presence had created a softness in a home that had long been defined by order and routine. Ellie chattered on about her favorite movies, pointing out the similarities between Landon and a superhero she liked because he works a lot and doesn't smile unless something really good happens. That comparison shocked a laugh out of Landon, a sound Rosa wasn't sure she'd ever heard from him. Not a polite exhale, not a professional reaction, a genuine laugh, faint but unmistakable. It startled her so much that she nearly dropped the cloth in her hand. She turned quickly so neither of them would see the flicker of emotion on her face. Ellie had always been a bright child, but Rosa had never seen her bring out something like that in anyone, especially a man like Landon. Minutes passed, then more. Every once in a while Rosa tried to redirect her daughter. Ellie, carry-o, let Millionaire Hale finish eating, she whispered from the kitchen doorway. But each time she spoke, Landon shook his head subtly as if reassuring her that he didn't mind. And he truly didn't. He hadn't finished a meal this slowly in years. Usually he ate out of habit rather than enjoyment, moving through dinner like another task on his neatly arranged schedule. Tonight, the meal stretched on, interrupted by Ellie's questions and her imaginative stories, and he found himself savoring each bite without thinking about it. The food tasted different when he wasn't eating alone. After a while, Rosa realized she was out of busywork. The kitchen gleamed, the living room had been tidied earlier, and the hallway didn't need vacuuming yet. She ran out of excuses to stand distant. Eventually she approached the dining room, standing behind Ellie with her hands clasped in front of her. "Ellie, sweetie, you've talked enough. Let Mr. Hale relax," she said gently, trying to ease her daughter down from the chair. But Landon looked up at Rosa as though her words unsettled him. "She's not bothering me," he said, "really. I don't get much company." The way he said it, plain, honest, almost vulnerable, made Rosa's heart tighten. It was the first time she had ever heard anything from him that hinted at loneliness. She swallowed the unexpected empathy rising in her throat and nodded, unable to find the right words. Ellie leaned back in her chair and kicked her legs, content as ever. She looked between Landon and her mother, then announced, "Mom is really tired today. She works too much." Rosa shot her a warning look, but the truth was out already. Landon's gaze drifted toward Rosa again, lingering longer this time. He took in the faint shadows under her eyes, the wariness etched into her posture, the quiet resilience she carried like armor. He wondered how long she had been carrying that weight, and how many people in her life, if any, noticed it. He wondered how much she had sacrificed for the little girl sitting beside him, bright and trusting and full of joy despite the hardships Rosa must have shielded her from. "You do a lot, don't you?" Landon asked gently, and Rosa felt as though the ground shifted beneath her. No employer had ever asked her that. They asked for results, consistency, reliability. They never asked how she managed, how she balanced everything, how she held herself together. She hesitated, not wanting to give too much away. "It's just work," she replied. "Everyone works hard, maybe," Landon said, "but not everyone does it alone." His words hung in the air in a way Rosa didn't know how to respond to. Something inside her softened briefly before she pulled her guard back up. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "We refine." Ellie, unaware of the deeper undercurrents between the adults, reached across the table and touched Landon's arm lightly. "When you're retired, my mom says you should take a nap," she advised with total seriousness. "Naps fix everything except broccoli." "Broccoli is horrible." Landon laughed again, more freely this time, and Ellie beamed at the praise. Rosa exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her daughter had somehow brought warmth into a home that had seemed emotionally untouched for years. Eventually, Ellie finished explaining her theory that clouds were actually giant cotton balls, and she leaned her head against her mother's hip. "Mommy, I like it here," she murmured sleepily. Rosa brushed her daughter's hair with gentle fingers, torn between affection and dread. She shouldn't let Ellie get attached. This world wasn't theirs. This moment wasn't permanent. It was an accident, a rare kindness, nothing more. But when she looked at Landon, really looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just interest in Ellie. It was recognition, a quiet understanding that connected them in ways neither expected. The realization made Rosa step back slightly, needing distance, needing to breathe. But Ellie clung to her shirt with one small hand, giggling sleepily, and Rosa stayed where she was. Landon watched the two of them, his expression thoughtful, conflicted even. He didn't fully understand the feeling growing inside him, but he knew it was something he wanted more of. The night ended slowly, reluctantly, with Rosa gathering Ellie's things and preparing to leave. Ellie waved at Landon like they were old friends, promising to bring him another drawing next time. Landon didn't correct her assumption. He didn't want to. Rosa hesitated at the door, wanting to thank him, wanting to apologize again, wanting to say something meaningful, but nothing came out right. In the end, she managed only a soft, "Good night, Mr. Hale." Landon answered with a nod, but his eyes followed them all the way to the elevator. When the doors closed, his penthouse felt different, not empty, changed. After Rosa and Ellie left that night, Landon expected his home to return to its usual stillness, but something felt different, off balance, almost unsettled in a way he couldn't quite define. He walked through the penthouse with the same purposeful strides he always used, yet every room seemed to carry a faint trace of the evening. The dining table didn't look the same. The chair Ellie had used remained pushed slightly out of place, her tiny fingerprints still visible on the edge of the table if he looked closely enough. And he did look more than once captivated by evidence that someone other than himself had been there. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have lingered, but it did. For the first time in years, dinner hadn't been a task. His food had tasted better, the air had felt less heavy, and the loneliness he'd grown comfortable with had loosened its grip without him realizing it. He had even caught himself smiling, a real smile, not the polite, practiced one he used in boardrooms. It surprised him that such a small presence, a 4-year-old with star-shaped cookies and boundless curiosity, could alter the landscape of his home so completely. And as he went to bed that night, he found himself replaying moments from the evening, analyzing the way Ellie had looked at him like he was someone worth talking to, someone worth sitting with, someone worth trusting. The next morning he moved through his routine with a strange sense of anticipation he didn't dare acknowledge. He brewed his coffee, skimmed reports, answered emails, but kept glancing at the clock. Thursdays were Rosa's cleaning days. But she had left early the night before because of Ellie's bedtime, and today wasn't Thursday. He knew he wouldn't see them. He knew his expectations were unreasonable. Yet a small part of him, a part long buried, kept hoping for a knock at the door or a small voice calling out from the hallway. Nothing happened, of course, but the absence felt heavier than usual. He tried to distract himself at work, diving into meetings, approving product designs, debating strategies with his senior engineers. But even in the middle of a tense discussion about an upcoming launch, he found his mind drifting back to Ellie's drawing of a cat that looked more like a rainbow-colored cloud with whiskers. Without thinking, he pulled out the folded paper he had tucked into his desk drawer before leaving home. It was ridiculous for a man like him, an industry titan, a media-dubbed modern-day innovator, to be holding a child's drawing during a meeting. Yet he found himself smoothing its edges, tracing the uneven lines, feeling something in his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. That night, he came home earlier than usual. He told himself he simply wanted rest, that he needed a break from the intensity of work. But when he stepped inside, he glanced again toward the dining room, half expecting Ellie to be there with her lunchbox, swinging her legs and announcing that she had saved him another star-shaped cookie. The room was empty, as it always had been before, except now emptiness felt wrong. He sat at the table anyway and looked at the chair she'd used, wondering when such an ordinary piece of furniture had earned this much of his attention. The days that followed passed slowly, each one marked by moments when his thoughts betrayed him. He imagined Ellie bursting into his office with a new drawing. He imagined Rosa gently reminding her to behave. He imagined the sound of Ellie trying to count the windows in his penthouse. She had asked about that. He remembered, and how she eventually gave up because "there are too many and my brain gets tired." It was absurd how clearly he remembered her words. He had listened to countless presentations, memorized thousands of lines of code, negotiated deals worth billions. Yet a child's offhand comment clung to his memory more stubbornly than anything else. By the time Thursday approached, Landon felt a restlessness he didn't know how to hide. He woke earlier than usual, got dressed with unusual care, and found himself staring at the elevator doors long before Rosa's shift was scheduled to begin. It frustrated him, the intensity of his anticipation, the way he felt almost pulled toward the moment he might see them again. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself he simply wanted to ensure there were no awkward feelings after the unexpected dinner. He wanted to reassure Rosa that her job was secure. He wanted to make sure Ellie didn't feel like she had overstepped. But beneath all those explanations was the truth he didn't dare say aloud. He missed them. When Rosa finally arrived, carrying her cleaning supplies and holding Ellie's hand, Landon was already in the living room, pretending to review a document he'd opened 3 times without reading. The moment Ellie spotted him, her face lit up like someone had flipped a switch inside her. She broke away from Rosa's grip and ran toward him, waving a new drawing above her head.
"Mr. Hale, I made you something else?"
The burst of joy that hit him was so strong it caught him off guard. He set the tablet aside, forcing himself to maintain a composed expression even while something inside him felt suddenly undeniably alive. Rosa hurried after her daughter, breathless and apologetic. "Mr. Hale, I'm so sorry." Landon shook his head quickly. "It's fine." The words were simple, but Rosa noticed something different in his tone, something softer, something almost grateful. Ellie climbed onto the couch beside him without waiting for permission. She held up her drawing, a bright, chaotic image of 3 stick figures standing in front of a tall building with too many windows. "This is you," she said, pointing at the tallest stick figure. "This is my mom, and this is me. It's your house, see? I put lots of windows because you have millions of them." Rosa nearly choked. "Ellie," she whispered, mortified, but Landon only smiled, genuinely amused. He studied the drawing closely, lingering on the image of 3 figures standing together as if they belonged in the same scene. Something warm spread through his chest at the thought. "It's perfect," he said, and he meant it. Ellie beamed with pride. As Rosa resumed her cleaning, she kept watching Landon out of the corner of her eye. Something had changed in him. The way he held Ellie's drawing, the way he listened attentively, the way he looked up whenever Rosa passed by, even if only for a second. There was an openness to him, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. It made her uneasy, not because it was unwelcome, but because it felt dangerous. She couldn't afford to misread his intentions. She couldn't let Ellie get attached to a man whose world was made of glass walls and soaring heights, a world capable of shattering hers without warning. Yet when she glanced at Ellie laughing beside him, so comfortable in his presence, Rosa felt her resolve weaken. She didn't know what was unfolding here, something tender, something complicated, something she wasn't ready for. But she knew one thing with startling clarity: Landon Hale was no longer the untouchable billionaire she cleaned for. He was something else now. Something becoming intertwined with her daughter's happiness and, she feared, her own heart. Ellie settled into her familiar spot beside Landon as though she had claimed it long ago, chatting about everything from her preschool teacher's glitter shoes to her ambition to someday own a castle, but only if it has pancakes every morning. Landon absorbed every word, not merely tolerating her chatter but genuinely interested, drawn into the lively energy she carried so effortlessly. He found himself glancing toward the kitchen every now and then, watching Rosa work with her usual focus. But now he noticed the slight strain in her shoulders, the way her gaze flicked toward them repeatedly, as if she were trying to convince herself that everything unfolding in front of her was harmless. He realized then that while Ellie had settled comfortably in his presence, Rosa was still on guard, protective, wary, caught between gratitude and fear. When Ellie hopped off the couch and wandered into the kitchen to ask her mother for another juice box, Landon followed her with his eyes and found himself staring at Rosa again, though this time he didn't look away quickly. There was something magnetic about her, something in the way she carried herself with quiet strength, something in the gentleness she radiated even when she tried to remain distant. She wasn't like anyone in his life. The people he interacted with daily had polished edges, honed ambition, and the kind of confidence that came from privilege. Rosa's confidence wasn't loud. It was earned through necessity, built through surviving what life threw at her. He admired that more than he knew how to say. But admiration wasn't something Rosa allowed herself to feel in return. She kept her distance, no matter how often her eyes drifted toward him. She reminded herself that boundaries existed for a reason. She worked in his home, that was all. Her daughter's attachment was already deep enough to frighten her. Ellie's world was delicate, filled with bright emotions, hope, and trust. It didn't take much to break a child's heart. If she let Ellie get too close, if Landon changed his mind one day, the disappointment would devastate her daughter. And Rosa couldn't let that happen. She had fought too hard to build a stable life for Ellie to jeopardize it now. Still, nothing she told herself seemed strong enough to suppress the warmth that crept into her chest whenever she saw Landon soften around Ellie, or the way he occasionally glanced at her with a look she didn't know how to interpret, curious, thoughtful, almost searching. She forced herself not to respond to it. She kept her face neutral, her voice professional, and her movements purposeful. And yet, despite all her efforts, she felt something shifting between them. Landon didn't know how to approach Rosa directly. He wanted to speak to her, to reassure her, to tell her that Ellie wasn't a burden and that her presence, both of their presences, brought something into his home he hadn't realized he craved. But communication wasn't easy for him even in the best of circumstances. His hearing loss had trained him to avoid emotional conversations. They required vulnerability, and vulnerability required trust, and trust wasn't something he had practiced much of. But with Rosa, he felt a pull he couldn't ignore, a quiet urge to know her, really know her. Not just the efficient woman who cleaned his home. Eventually, Rosa returned to the living room, gently directing Ellie back to her coloring pages so she could vacuum the hallway. As she walked past Landon, he spoke before he had time to second-guess himself. "Rosa," he said, and she froze, startled by the way her name sounded in his voice. He rarely addressed her directly unless it was work-related. She turned slowly, bracing for something she couldn't predict. "You don't have to keep her away from me," he said. His tone was hesitant, careful. "If you were worried about that." Her expression tightened. "Mr. Hale, she's a child. Children don't understand boundaries. And I don't want her to get too comfortable in a place that isn't ours." "It doesn't bother me," he replied softly. "I like having her here." Rose exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. "I know you mean well. But you don't understand how things are for people like us." She paused before adding, "People like you don't usually stay involved with people like us. And I need to protect her from that." The honesty of her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't accusing him. She was shielding her daughter from disappointment, something he knew intimately. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. Rose's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her caution. She nodded politely and returned to her work without responding. Ellie, oblivious to the tension, began to hum a tune from one of her cartoons. She drew pictures of cats, clouds, and pancakes with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything, occasionally pausing to show Landon her progress. He responded with encouraging nods, unable to contain the small smile that tugged at the corners of his mouth. Rosa noticed the smile despite herself. She tried to pay attention to the vacuum cord, to the corners that needed dusting, to anything that would keep her from focusing on the impossible tenderness forming across the room. But nothing worked. Every time she looked up, Landon was there, watching Ellie, or watching her, or watching both, as though they had filled a space he hadn't realized was empty. Later, when Rosa went to empty the trash, she overheard Ellie talking to Landon about school. "Sometimes the kids don't sit with me at lunch," her daughter admitted. "They sit with the same people every day, and if you sit in their spot, they get mad. So I sit by myself sometimes. But it's okay, I just pretend I'm having lunch with my mom." Rosa's chest ached hearing that. She hadn't known. Ellie hid small hurts to keep her mother from worrying. Before she could comfort her daughter, she heard Landon respond gently, "I sit by myself too sometimes." Ellie looked at him, brows lifting. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, "sometimes people don't know how to talk to me, or they get uncomfortable, so I end up alone." Ellie considered this, then declared confidently, "Well, you don't have to be alone now. I can sit with you, and my mom can too." Rosa's breath caught. She waited for Landon to correct her daughter, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, as if the idea meant more to him than he could express. When Rosa returned to the room, she found Landon looking at Ellie with an expression she didn't recognize, something tender, something grateful, something dangerous. She swallowed hard and looked away, her heart uneasy. But that night, after they left, Landon lingered in the living room, staring at the crumpled drawing Ellie had forgotten on the couch. 3 figures. One home, one improbable connection he couldn't bring himself to let go of. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to. Marcus Hale arrived at the Halitech Tower late on a Monday evening, irritated by delays at the airport, and in an even worse mood after learning that one of their major investors wanted an emergency meeting. He had been away for 10 days, traveling between Boston, Chicago, and Austin, and every city greeted him with problems he had to fix. But nothing irritated Marcus quite as much as surprises, especially when they involved his younger brother. Landon was brilliant, but brilliance didn't exempt him from Marcus's scrutiny. Marcus had practically built Halitech beside him, brick by brick, and he considered it his responsibility, no, his obligation, to ensure nothing jeopardized their empire. And Landon, despite his genius, had a habit of creating vulnerabilities that Marcus had to clean up. He expected the usual when he stepped into the office that morning: an update from their teams, data analysis reports, maybe a few issues that required his signature. What he didn't expect was the subtle shift in Landon's demeanor during the meeting that followed. His brother, normally precise, direct, and unwavering, seemed distracted, not inattentive, just elsewhere, as if something other than Halitech had taken up residence in his mind. Marcus watched him closely, noticing how Landon's gaze drifted toward his phone between presentations. His brother never checked his phone during meetings. Ever. That alone was enough to raise suspicion. Marcus waited until the room emptied before speaking. "You seem preoccupied," he said, closing the conference room door behind them. Landon didn't answer immediately. He just shrugged, gathering the documents in front of him. "Long week," he said simply. But Marcus wasn't convinced. He could read Landon better than anyone. He'd grown up studying his brother, protecting him, defending him, worrying about him. And this wasn't just fatigue. This was something else. Something new. So Marcus dug deeper over the next few days. He asked their assistant about Landon's schedule. He reviewed the security logs out of habit, something he did regularly anyway, and then he saw it. Thursday, multiple entries. Access granted to household staff and a child registered under a temporary visitor pass. His jaw tightened. Child in Landon's penthouse. Since when did Landon entertain visitors, let alone a child? He didn't reach conclusions right away. He wanted facts, he wanted answers, and Marcus got them sooner than he expected. That Thursday he arrived at Landon's penthouse unannounced, using his personal access code. He had every right to question what was happening in his brother's home, especially when their company's public image depended on maintaining a pristine reputation. But as soon as he stepped inside, he froze. There she was, Ellie, sprawled on the living room rug with crayons scattered around her, drawing an elaborate picture of what looked like Landon holding a giant pancake. Her laughter rang through the space as she bounced from color to color. Rosa stood nearby, wiping down the glass coffee table, trying to keep her distance but occasionally glancing at her daughter with a softness Marcus had never seen in this home. And Landon was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Ellie, watching her with a warmth Marcus didn't recognize. A warmth that startled him. For a brief moment Marcus just stared, confusion, disbelief, and then irritation, sharp and immediate. This was not normal. This was not professional. This was not safe. "What is going on here?" Marcus demanded, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Ellie jumped, startled, dropping her crayon. Rosa stiffened, immediately stepping forward as if to shield her daughter. Landon rose slowly to his feet, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Marcus," he said with forced calm, "this isn't the time." "It seems exactly the time," Marcus shot back. "I walk into your home and find," he gestured sharply at Ellie. "What is she doing here? What is any of this?" Ellie clung to her mother's leg wide-eyed. Rosa's heart hammered. But she lifted her chin in that steady way she did when life demanded strength she didn't have time to muster. "We were just finishing up," she said carefully. "Not that it's any of my business," Marcus continued, ignoring Rosa entirely, "but bringing a child into your personal space. Allowing staff to get this comfortable. Landon, this isn't appropriate." The words stung more than anyone expected, especially Ellie, who didn't understand them but felt their sharpness. Landon stepped forward. "You don't get to talk about them like that," he said, a rare edge in his tone. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. "Landon, I'm trying to protect you. Whatever this is a liability." "She's a child," Landon countered, pointing gently toward Ellie. "Not a liability. Her presence here could be misinterpreted. You're a public figure. We have investors to answer to, a reputation to maintain. You can't just invite strangers into your life because you're having a bad week." Rosa flinched, insulted by the word strangers. Ellie pressed her face into Rosa's hip. Landon's jaw tightened. "They were not strangers." Marcus paused, recalibrating. The weight of those words told him everything he didn't want to hear. Something was forming here, something emotional, something personal, something dangerously human. And Marcus despised unpredictability more than anything. He turned his attention on Rosa now, assessing her with cold calculation. "This is unprofessional," he said bluntly. "You should know better." Rosa absorbed the hit without breaking. She'd been judged by men like him many times. She stood straighter, her voice calm but firm. "I never intended to cross any lines, sir. My daughter, only your daughter, shouldn't be here to begin with." Marcus cut in. Ellie's lip trembled. She didn't understand everything being said, but she understood blame. She tugged at her mother's shirt and whispered, "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" Rosa's chest cracked. Before she could respond, Landon did. "No," he said, stepping closer to Ellie and kneeling down so she could see his face clearly. "You did nothing wrong." His voice was steady, sure, protective, something Rosa wasn't prepared for. Marcus watched the interaction with growing frustration. "Landon, you're letting your emotions interfere with reason." "Maybe for once that's not a bad thing," Landon replied. Marcus stared at him as if he were losing his mind. Whatever bond you're reforming, it's not sustainable, it's not wise. And it's not something we can allow to interfere with the company." "That was the trigger, the company," Landon repeated incredulously. "She's a child, Marcus. My life is more than Halitech." Marcus froze, blindsided by the words he'd never expected to hear from his brother's mouth. Rosa's breath caught. Ellie watched with wide, confused eyes. The two brothers stood rigid, the air thick with tension. Marcus wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by Landon. He exhaled sharply. "We'll discuss this later," he said, his voice clipped. "But I assure you this isn't over." He glanced briefly at Rosa and Ellie, his expression unreadable, then turned and left. When the door closed, Rosa looked at Landon, guilt knotting inside her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is my fault." "No," Landon said immediately. "It's not." Ellie tugged at his sleeve, eyes glossy. "Are you mad at him?" she asked softly. "No," Landon answered, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story. "Just disappointed." Rosa gathered her daughter's things quickly, her movements shaky. She could feel the walls closing in, not just from Marcus, but from reality. This world was too dangerous for her child. Too powerful, too complicated, too far from their own. "We should go," she said. Landon didn't argue. He only watched them with something heavy in his eyes, something afraid of losing something he never knew he needed. When the elevator doors closed behind them, the penthouse didn't feel the same anymore. It felt like the beginning of a battle neither of them were ready for. Marcus didn't wait long before escalating the situation. The very next morning, before Landon even arrived at the office, Marcus had already called 2 board members, drafted an internal memo, and scheduled a confidential discussion under the guise of protecting Halitech's public image. He framed it as a necessary precaution, hinting that Landon might make impulsive personal decisions that could expose the company to unnecessary scrutiny. Marcus was skilled at shaping narratives. He didn't lie. He simply shaped the truth into something sharp enough to wound. By the time Landon arrived, unaware of the storm brewing, the boardroom was already filled with tension. The meeting began abruptly. "We've received concerning reports," Marcus announced once everyone had taken their seats. His tone was authoritative, the kind that demanded attention before anyone even knew what the issue was. Landon felt a familiar heaviness settle into his chest. He knew that tone well. It meant something was coming, something Marcus believed he had every right to control. "Reports about what?" Landon asked, scanning the room. The board exchanged uneasy glances. They respected Landon's intelligence, but they feared Marcus's influence. Marcus folded his hands. "Your personal life." The temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. Landon leaned back slowly, jaw tightening. "Explain." "We have documentation," Marcus continued, "that a child and her mother have been spending extended periods of time in your penthouse. A household employee, a situation that could easily be misconstrued should the media catch wind of it. The insinuation was clear and poisonous. This is unacceptable risk," one of the board members added hesitantly. "Rumors spread quickly, especially around someone with your visibility." Landon felt anger spark beneath his ribs, slow, controlled, but undeniable. "A cleaning employee and her daughter being in my home is not a scandal," he said. But Marcus was ready. "Maybe not. But perception is everything, and right now your behavior is unpredictable." "Unpredictable," Landon echoed, the word burning. "Because I had dinner with a 4-year-old, Marcus didn't flinch. "Because you allowed personal boundaries to blur. And if this continues, the company could face fallout." Landon stared at his brother, stunned not by the accusation itself, but by the ease with which Marcus had used Ellie and Rosa as ammunition. "You're blowing this out of proportion," Landon said through clenched teeth. "No," Marcus answered calmly, "I'm preventing a problem." He turned to the board. "This is why we need safeguards. Landon is brilliant, but he can be impulsive. For the sake of stability, I propose shifting executive authority temporarily, until things settle." It took Landon a moment to understand what he was hearing. Marcus wasn't just reprimanding him, he was positioning himself to take control of Halitech. Shock rippled through Landon, quickly followed by betrayal. Deep-cutting betrayal. "So this is about power," he said. Marcus met his gaze steadily. "This is about protecting everything we built," Landon repeated quietly. Something in him snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that sent a chill down his spine. "No, this is about controlling me. Controlling my life, my choices, like you always have." Marcus stiffened. The board shifted uneasily, sensing the fracture widening between the brothers. Landon's voice dropped lower, sharper. "You can question my business decisions, but you don't get to decide who I allow into my home." "When your home is a liability, I do," Marcus shot back. "We were not talking about a friend or a colleague. We were talking about an employee with a child who has no connection to our world. You don't know their intentions." Landon slammed his hand on the table, not in rage, but in a rare, explosive release of emotion. "Ellie is a child. Rosa is raising her alone. They were good people, better than anyone in this room, accusing them of intentions they don't have." The board members exchanged nervous looks. One of them tried to intervene. "We were simply suggesting that you keep appropriate boundaries, Mr. Hale. It's not personal." But to Landon it was deeply personal. Every word from Marcus had been laced with the assumption that Rosa and Ellie were beneath him, unworthy, dangerous even. And that assumption made something fierce ignite inside him, something protective, something he hadn't felt in years. Marcus wasn't finished. Landon, listen to reason. You can't let a fleeting emotional attachment jeopardize your position or the company's future. Landon rose slowly from his chair, steady but trembling with restrained fury. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you think my entire life belongs to you and this company. That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you were saying. His voice was quiet but carried more weight than any shout could have. The boardroom fell into uneasy silence, one created not by the absence of sound but by the presence of conflict so heavy it pressed against every wall. Landon turned to the board, his expression resolute. I'm not stepping down. I'm not transferring authority. And I won't apologize for caring about a child who did nothing wrong. Marcus's jaw flexed. This isn't over, he repeated, echoing the warning he had given in the penthouse. No, Landon replied coldly, it isn't. When the meeting adjourned, the board members scattered quickly, eager to escape the charged atmosphere. Marcus stayed behind. You were making a mistake, he said quietly. Landon looked him dead in the eye. The only mistake I ever made was letting you believe you'd control me forever. Marcus flinched barely, but Landon saw it. Stay away from them, Marcus warned, or I'll do whatever is necessary to protect this company. Landon stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you come after them, you'll lose me before you lose anything else. And you know this company can't survive that. The brothers stared each other down, the space between them filled with years of power struggles, unspoken resentments, and now something far more dangerous, the beginning of a war neither had planned for. Later that night, when Landon returned to his empty penthouse, his mind wasn't on the company. It wasn't on the board. It wasn't even on Marcus. It was on Rosa and Ellie, on the fear in Rosa's eyes, the innocence in Ellie's smile, and the sinking realization that Marcus would not hesitate to use them as leverage. For the first time, the empire he had built felt like a cage rather than an achievement, and the cost of keeping it suddenly felt too high. Rosa felt the tension from the moment she stepped into the penthouse the next day. She didn't have to see Marcus again to know his presence lingered in the air like a warning. Landon greeted her at the door with an expression she had never seen on him before, exhaustion mixed with something deeper, something she recognized from years of navigating hardship, worry. Real heavy worry. He tried to hide it, straightening his posture, offering a brief smile to Ellie, but Rosa saw the strain in his eyes. She saw the toll the board meeting must have taken on him. And she knew immediately, without needing details, that Marcus had escalated things far beyond what happened in the living room. That knowledge alone made her spine stiffen with guilt. She had known from the beginning that getting close to Landon was dangerous. Not because he was unkind or unpredictable, quite the opposite. He had shown more gentleness than most men she'd known. But men like him didn't live simple lives. Men like him carried responsibilities that stretched into every corner of their world, responsibilities that didn't leave room for vulnerability or unexpected attachments. And Rosa, with her mop and her overworked heart and her little girl who loved too easily, existed in a different universe entirely. She had stepped across that invisible line the moment she allowed Ellie to sit at his table. She hadn't realized it then. She realized it now. While Rosa cleaned the kitchen, Ellie ran excitedly to Landon, waving a new drawing she had made that morning. He knelt down to greet her, listening as she explained every star and scribble on the paper. But Rosa watched the exchange closely and noticed something she hadn't seen before, not from Ellie, but from Landon. He was trying too hard. His smile was a little too tight. His attention, usually calm and focused, flickered as though something kept dragging him back into the heavy reality he carried. Ellie didn't see it. Ellie never saw the shadows adults tried to hide, but Rosa did, and it broke her. When Landon stood up, Rosa met his gaze briefly. It was enough. She saw the truth even before he said anything. Marcus had threatened something. Something big, maybe the company, maybe their partnership, maybe Landon's leadership position. Whatever it was, it had placed a pressure on him so immense that Rosa could practically feel it pushing against her daughter's small world. She couldn't let that happen. She couldn't let Ellie become the reason Landon lost everything he'd built. Eventually, when Ellie wandered back to her coloring pages, Rosa approached Landon. She kept her voice low, steady, even though her stomach twisted into knots. What happened? She asked. Landon didn't answer right away. He looked toward Ellie, then back at Rosa, as if deciding how much she could handle. Marcus brought the board into it, he said finally. The words alone made Rosa's pulse quicken. They think this situation could damage the company's reputation. Rosa exhaled slowly, absorbing the blow. She had expected something like this, but hearing it aloud made her fears solidify. Because of Ellie, she murmured. Because of us, not because of you, Landon corrected instantly. Because Marcus is afraid of things he can't control. But Rosa shook her head. This wouldn't be happening if we hadn't gotten close. If I had been more careful. If Ellie, her voice cracked slightly before she steadied it. You were under pressure because of us, Landon stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't regret anything that's happened between us. Not for a second. Those words hit Rosa with a painful blend of comfort and heartbreak. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to live in that truth. But she knew better. She always knew better. She looked away, unsure how to hold the weight of his sincerity. Mr. Hale, Landon, he corrected softly, please. She hesitated, then nodded once reluctantly. Landon, she said, the name tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. This can't continue. It's hurting you. The moment the words left her mouth, she saw the shift in his expression, the subtle recoil, the disbelief, the vulnerability he tried to mask. Rosa, he said, taking a step closer, don't do that. I have to, she whispered. I can't let my daughter be the reason you lose your position. I can't let her become a weapon your brother uses against you. Landon's voice hardened. You're not a weapon. And Ellie is not a threat. That doesn't matter, Rosa replied. Marcus believes what he believes, and men like him don't stop. He'll push harder, and if I stay here, he'll use you until something breaks. The truth settled between them like a heavy curtain neither wanted to acknowledge. Landon ran a hand across his forehead, frustration building in his features. So what? You just gonna leave? Rosa's throat tightened. I don't want to, but I think it's the only way to protect you. To protect Ellie. Landon's breath hitched just slightly, but enough for Rosa to notice. You don't need to protect me, he said, almost pleading. Yes, Rosa replied softly, I do, because you won't protect yourself. You'll fight for us, even if it costs you everything. And she was right. Landon knew she was right. He would fight, he already had, and Marcus had already drawn the battle lines. Rosa swallowed the pain gathering in her chest and forced the words out. We'll finish today. Then we won't come back. Ellie, overhearing only the last part, looked up from her drawing. We were not coming back. Her small voice trembled with confusion. Rosa knelt next to her, brushing her daughter's cheek with shaking fingers. No, my Amber, not anymore. Ellie frowned, her lower lip wobbling. But I like it here. Rosa pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I know. I do too. Landon stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly as he watched them. He felt something inside him unraveling, slipping through his grasp faster than he could hold on. Rosa, he said again, this time with raw desperation. Please, but Rosa only shook her head, eyes shining with the pain she didn't want anyone to see. You deserve peace, Landon. And my daughter deserves stability. If we stay, neither of us will have that. Ellie tugged on Rosa's shirt again. Can I say bye to him? She whispered. Rosa nodded, unable to speak. Ellie walked to Landon slowly, holding her newest, drawing a picture of holding her hand beside a large sun with too many rays. She extended it toward him with both hands. This is for you, she said, so you don't forget me. The words crushed him. He knelt, accepting the drawing like it was something sacred. I won't, he said, voice rough. Ellie wrapped her arms around his neck in a hug so small yet so devastating it nearly brought him to his knees. He held her carefully, memorizing the warmth of her arms, the weight of her trust. When she pulled back, Rosa was already gathering their things. She wouldn't look at him. She couldn't. And when the elevator doors closed behind them, Landon felt something inside his chest fall apart completely, not with noise, but with a quiet finality that left the entire penthouse feeling colder than ever before. Landon didn't sleep that night. He tried lying on his back, eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling, but his thoughts refused to settle. Every detail of Rosa's departure replayed in a loop, the tremble in her voice, Ellie's confused face, the way Rosa wouldn't meet his eyes because she knew if she did, she might not be able to walk away. He felt the echo of Ellie's small arms around his neck long after she left, a memory so vivid it burned. He felt the weight of Rosa's heartbreak, even though she tried so hard to hide it. And he felt the void they left behind, a void deeper than anything he had allowed himself to feel in years. He tried to distract himself by reviewing reports, forcing himself into spreadsheets and analytics, but nothing took hold. His mind drifted back to the drawing Ellie had given him. He unfolded it again, smoothing the crinkled edges with trembling fingers. 3 figures to him: Ellie, Rosa, a bright sun overhead, a world where they stood together smiling, a world that felt impossibly out of reach now. He placed the drawing on his nightstand, then picked it up again. He couldn't let it go. By morning, exhaustion clung to him, but the determination in his chest overpowered it. He couldn't let things end like this. Not with Rosa thinking she needed to disappear to protect him. Not with Ellie believing she'd done something wrong. He needed to see them. He needed to talk to Rosa, not through Marcus, not through fear, but directly, honestly, without the weight of the company between them. He didn't have a plan, he didn't need one. The only thing he knew was that losing them felt unbearably wrong. He left the penthouse earlier than usual, ignoring his assistant's attempt to intercept him with a stack of documents that required signatures. Normally he would have read every page carefully. Today, he couldn't force himself to care. Instead of heading downtown toward Halitech Tower, he told his driver to take him to Queens. The driver raised an eyebrow. Landon never changed his routine but nodded and began the drive. Traffic was heavy, but Landon barely noticed. His thoughts raced faster than the cabs weaving around them. When he arrived at Rosa's building, a modest, aging brick complex squeezed between a laundromat and a tiny grocery store, he felt something unfamiliar coil inside him. Nerves, anticipation, fear that he might be too late, fear that she might not open the door, fear that he had already lost them. He stepped out of the car and climbed the staircase to the second floor, gripping the railing tightly as if bracing himself for impact. When he reached her door, he forced his hand to knock. It took a moment before he heard movement inside. Then Rosa appeared, opening the door just enough to look out. The moment she saw him, her breath caught. She hadn't expected him. She wasn't prepared. She blinked wide-eyed, stunned into stillness. "Landon," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. He nodded once, his chest tight. "I needed to see you." She exhaled shakily and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her so Ellie wouldn't hear. "Shouldn't be here," she said softly. "If your brother, I don't care what Marcus thinks," he cut in. "This isn't about him." Rosa shook her head, trying to summon the strength she'd used to walk away the day before. "It has to be about him, Landon. He has power over your company, over your reputation, over everything you've built. I don't care about any of that right now. You should." Her voice broke slightly. "Because people like Marcus can ruin lives in ways they never have to take responsibility for. And people like me, we're the ones who pay the price." He reached for her hand without thinking, but she pulled it away, not out of rejection, but out of fear of wanting what she couldn't have. He felt the sting anyway. "Rosa," he said, lowering his voice, "you leaving didn't fix anything. It just made everything worse." "I'm trying to protect you," she whispered. "And my daughter. From what? From a world that isn't built for us." She looked away, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. "I can't let Ellie grow attached to someone she can't have. Someone who belongs to a life she'll never be welcome in." Landon took a step closer. "Do you really think I see you that way?" "It doesn't matter how you see me," Rosa said, pain edging into her voice. "It's how your brother sees me, how the board sees me, how the world sees me, and how easily they can hurt us." Landon swallowed hard, chest tightening. He had spent years avoiding vulnerability, avoiding connection, avoiding emotional risks. But standing before Rosa now, he knew none of that mattered anymore. He would risk everything for this, for them. "I don't want to lose you," he said, the truth raw and unshielded. Rosa closed her eyes as if the words struck a wound she had tried to close. "You already have," she whispered. "I made my decision. I'm asking you to reconsider, and I'm asking you to walk away before this gets worse." Her voice wavered, but her resolve held. "Please, Landon, don't make this harder." Ellie's voice suddenly sounded from inside the apartment. "Mommy, is someone there?" Rosa turned quickly, her composure faltering. When she opened the door, Ellie peeked out, rubbing her eyes from just waking up. The moment she saw Landon, her tired expression shifted to a bright smile.
"Mr. Hale!"
she chirped, running forward until Rosa caught her. "Are you here to see my new drawing?" She held up a sheet of paper covered in blue circles and crooked lines.
"It's the ocean."
"You said I should draw different things." Landon's heart clenched. He knelt, smiling warmly. "I'd love to see it." Rosa watched helplessly as Ellie climbed into his arms with complete trust, wrapping herself around him like he was someone she had known forever. And maybe in her heart she had. Rosa couldn't pull her away. Not yet. Not when Ellie looked so happy. Not when Landon held her so carefully, as if she were made of something precious. After a few moments, Rosa cleared her throat. "Ellie, my amor, go finish your breakfast. I'll be right there." Ellie reluctantly released Landon and ran back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. When she disappeared, Rosa turned back to him. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "This is why I have to go," she whispered. "Because she loves you already, and you restarting to love her too." Landon didn't deny it. "I am." Rosa's breath trembled. "That's exactly the problem." "No," he said, stepping closer. "That's exactly the reason we should find a way." She shook her head. "There is no way. Not with your brother threatening you. Not with the board watching. And not with the world ready to twist whatever they see." He opened his mouth to argue, but Rosa raised a hand weakly. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Landon. Not to me. And not to my daughter." He stared at her, stunned by the quiet finality in her tone. This wasn't anger. This was heartbreak disguised as strength. "I can't lose you," he said again. "You already have," she repeated softly. Then, as if afraid she would break if she stayed another second, Rosa stepped inside and closed the door slowly, carefully, as though any sudden movement might shatter her completely. Landon stood frozen in the hallway long after the latch clicked shut, his chest tight, his breathing uneven. He had come to bring them back. Instead, he had learned just how much he stood to lose. and walking away from that door was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Landon returned to the penthouse that day feeling heavier than he had in years, carrying an H he didn't know how to handle. He had endured pressure from investors, crises that threatened Halitech's stability, nights buried in work with no end in sight. But nothing compared to the hollow weight Rosa left him with when she closed her apartment door. The moment he stepped inside, the space felt foreign to him, as if he were intruding on someone else's life. The furniture looked too polished, the floors too clean, the windows too large. Everything felt painfully, unbearably empty. It was no longer the home Ellie had filled with color, questions, and laughter. It was just a place again, a place without warmth, a place without them. He walked through the room slowly, taking in the small shadows of what had been. The rug where Ellie once sprawled with her crayons held no trace of the bright chaos she brought. The dining table, where she'd offered him half a cookie, felt too long now, its emptiness stretching across the surface like an accusation. Even the faint smell of cleaning supplies reminded him of Rosa, her steady presence, the soft hum she sometimes made without realizing it, the careful way she moved around his space as though she didn't want to disturb the air itself. He missed her in a way that startled him. It wasn't just longing. It was a tightness in his chest, a pull toward something he'd barely begun to understand. For the next few days, he threw himself into work in an attempt to bury the ache. He stayed late at the office, reviewed every document Marcus pushed toward him, even attended meetings he normally delegated to upper management. His team assumed he was simply being diligent. Markover saw right through him. He recognized avoidance when he saw it. Landon had been avoiding emotions his entire life. Now he was avoiding heartbreak. But even drowning himself in work didn't help. Every few minutes, a memory slipped through the cracks, Ellie laughing as she explained why clouds should come in more colors, Rosa tucking her hair behind her ear while wiping down the kitchen counter, Ellie tugging at his sleeve to show him a crooked star she drew just for him, Rosa's voice breaking as she told him they couldn't come back. These moments haunted him, not loudly, but constantly, like a pulse beneath his thoughts he couldn't escape. One evening, after another exhausting day at the office, Landon returned home and found himself walking toward a drawer where he had stored Ellie's drawings. He took them out one by one, smoothing each page with a tenderness he didn't know he was capable of. A picture of 3 figures by a tall building, a rainbow-colored animal, a sun with far too many rays, and finally the drawing Ellie gave him on the day Rosa walked away. He traced the stick figures with his thumb, swallowing the lump growing in his throat. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't capable of it, but because the H was too deep for tears. He placed the drawings carefully on his desk, unable to put them away again. They made the penthouse feel less empty, even though they hurt to look at. He wondered how Ellie was doing. Whether she was still drawing pictures in bright colors. Whether she was asking about him. Whether she thought he had forgotten her. The thought made his stomach twist. He wondered about Rosa too. Whether she was holding up under the weight of her decision. Whether she regretted it. Whether she thought he had moved on. Part of him wanted to go back to her apartment, knock again, refuse to leave until she understood that he wasn't afraid of her, or Ellie, or anything Marcus threatened. But another part of him, the part that respected her strength, knew she needed space. She didn't make choices lightly. If she walked away, it was because she believed it was best for Ellie. But Landon couldn't shake the urge to fix things, to find a solution. To make her see that she didn't have to protect him by leaving. That he wanted them in his life, not as obligations, but as something else. Something he didn't yet have a name for, but felt with every breath. He tried telling himself it was temporary, that the feeling would fade with time, that eventually the absence would become familiar again. He had lived alone for years, he could live alone again. But the truth settled in slowly, painfully. He didn't want to. The change in him didn't go unnoticed. Marcus saw the shift in Landon's performance, sharp, inconsistent, distracted. He watched his brother drift through meetings with a faraway look, watched him struggle to focus. Watched the crack in his usually impenetrable composure widen day by day. Marcus interpreted it as instability, weakness, proof that he had been right to intervene. But Marcus didn't understand the depth of what Landon had lost. He didn't understand that this wasn't some impulsive attachment or fleeting distraction. This was something real, something that changed the axis of Landon's world in ways he didn't fully comprehend until it was taken from him. One night as Landon stood on the balcony overlooking the New York skyline, he felt exhaustion settle over him like a thick blanket. The city lights glittered below, vibrant and alive, while he felt unmoving, disconnected. He leaned on the railing, gripping it tightly as he replayed Rosa's last words, "Don't make promises you can't keep, Landon. Not to me and not to my daughter." A part of him agreed. Another part of him, the part that had grown fiercely attached to Ellie's drawings and Rosa's gentle strength, refused to accept that this was the end. The following days didn't get easier. If anything, they grew heavier. Landon began leaving the office early without explanation, withdrawing from the routines that had once grounded him. He canceled lunches, rescheduled investor meetings, and spent more time in his penthouse than he had in years. But being home didn't soothe him. It only amplified the absence. He caught himself glancing toward the door as if expecting Ellie to burst in with a new picture. He found himself walking past the dining table and stopping, remembering her climbing into a chair with determined little legs. He found his thoughts drifting to Rosa, how she looked when she was trying not to smile, how carefully she listened, how her presence softened the sharp edges of his world. Finally, one night, after pacing the living room for far too long, Landon made a decision. He wasn't giving up. He wasn't letting Marcus decide the course of his life. He wasn't letting fear dictate his future. Rosa left to protect him, but she didn't understand something fundamental. He didn't want protection, he wanted them. And he would find a way to prove that he didn't care about the barriers she feared. He would find a way to show her that he could fight not for the company, not for his reputation, but for the first thing that had made him feel alive in years. He didn't know how yet, but he knew this: he wouldn't let their story end at a closed door in Queens, not when it had only just begun. Marcus had always known how to push Landon into a corner, but this time something shifted, something Marcus didn't anticipate. The more Landon struggled with the emptiness of his penthouse and the absence of Rosa and Ellie, the more he realized how deeply Marcus had manipulated the situation. The board meeting, the warnings, the subtle remarks. Marcus had crossed a line he had no right to cross. And Landon, who had spent a lifetime avoiding confrontation, felt a new fire building inside him. The weight of losing Rosa wasn't weakening him. It was sharpening him. He walked into Halitech's tower the next morning with a determination that unsettled even the most confident employees. His steps were quicker, his jaw tense, his expression carved from something fierce and immovable. He didn't stop to greet anyone. He didn't wait for his assistant to hand over his schedule. He headed straight for Marcus's office, ignoring the startled looks from staff along the way. Marcus looked up from his desk when Landon entered without knocking. His expression flickered, first with surprise, then with irritation. "You can't keep barging in like this," Marcus said, closing the document he was reviewing. "Some of us are working." Landon stepped forward, planting both hands on his brother's desk. "Stop acting like you were the only one carrying this company," he said, voice low but steady. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You're angry, I get it. But this needs to be handled rationally." "You don't get anything," Landon shot back. "You went behind my back. You dragged the board into something that had nothing to do with them. You humiliated someone who didn't deserve it." Marcus scoffed. "Are we really still talking about the cleaning woman and her kid?" Landon's fists tightened. "Don't call them that." "What?" Marcus replied, unbothered. "That's what they are." "No," Landon said, leaning closer. "They are more than that. And you know it." Marcus watched him carefully, searching his brother's face for something he couldn't quite name. Worry, attachment, something dangerously close to love. "Landon," Marcus said slowly, "people like us can't afford distractions like this." "People like you can't," Landon corrected. "I can choose differently." Marcus rose from his chair now, circling around the desk to stand face to face with him. "You're risking everything. For what? A woman you barely know, a child that isn't yours." Something inside Landon snapped. "And what if I want them in my life?" he demanded. "What then, Marcus? Are you going to threaten the board every time I care about someone? Are you going to decide every relationship I'm allowed to have?" Marcus inhaled sharply. "I'm trying to protect this company. Protect you. Since when do you want a family? Since when do you want anything outside of work?" Landon didn't hesitate. "Since I met them." The air shifted between them, heavy and charged. Marcus rubbed his forehead in frustration. "This is exactly why we need structure, boundaries." "No," Landon said. "This is why I need to take back control. You've been speaking for me for years, making decisions for me, assuming you get to run everything in my life because you were afraid I couldn't handle it." "You couldn't," Marcus fired back. "And maybe you still can't." Landon straightened. "Watch me." There was something in his voice Marcus hadn't heard before, a steadiness, a conviction, an emotional authority that didn't come from titles or wealth. It came from loss. Marcus stiffened, caught off guard by the force behind it. Landon continued, "You don't get to decide who I care about. You don't get to take away the things that make me feel human. This is reckless. This is mine." Marcus tried another angle. "If the press finds out, then I'll answer them," Landon said. "Not you, not the board, me." "You being emotional," Marcus said coldly. "You damn right I am," Landon replied. "For once I'm not building my life around your rules." The stare down between them dragged out, long and tense. Finally, Marcus exhaled quietly, his expression hardening into something colder. If you walk down this path, you on your own. Landon didn't flinch. I've been on my own for a long time, he said. You just never noticed. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Don't do this, Landon. I already have. When Landon left the office, he didn't feel victorious, not yet. There was too much work ahead, too much damage to repair. But the heaviness inside him didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt pulseful, like movement instead of paralysis. Like he was stepping towards something real instead of letting fear drag him back. Throughout the day, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He reviewed contracts with sharper attention. He countered objections in meetings with a steadiness that surprised his own team. He made decisions without hesitation, not because he was trying to impress Marcus or the board, but because he finally understood what he wanted beyond the company. The moment the workday ended, he didn't head home. He took a cab to a nearby cafe in Queens, the kind of place Rosa might visit on her days off. He sat near the window, nursing a cup of coffee he didn't really want, scanning the sidewalk outside with restless hope. It was irrational to think she'd appear here, but Hope didn't care about logic, not now. He spent the next few days quietly searching for ways to see her again without pushing, without crossing the boundaries she'd set. He checked community centers near her building, hoping maybe Ellie had art classes there. He walked through the park a few blocks away, imagining Ellie running between the swings. He found himself scanning crowds for Rosa's dark hair, Ellie's bright smile. He didn't approach them. He wouldn't do that to Rosa, but he couldn't stop looking. At home, he began making changes without realizing what they meant. He rearranged the dining room, leaving the chair Ellie liked to use close to his. He stocked the pantry with the juice boxes she loved. He placed her drawings on the wall near the window, where the sun hit them in the afternoon. He even asked his housekeeper not to polish the glass coffee table too aggressively because Rosa had touched it, because it held a memory he wasn't ready to lose. Day by day, Landon became a little less of the man he had been and a little more of the man Rosa made him want to be. A man capable of connection, of love, of protecting not just a company but the people who mattered to him. And with each passing hour, one truth grew clearer and sharper inside him. He wouldn't let Marcus dictate his future. He wouldn't let fear decide what he was allowed to feel. And he wouldn't let Rosa walk away believing she had to protect him from herself. Because Landon Hale had finally realized something he had never allowed himself to admit until now. He needed them, and he was done pretending otherwise. Days passed with a heaviness that clung to Landon no matter where he went. He showed up to work, attended meetings, made decisions, but everything felt mechanical. His mind drifted constantly to Queens, to the hallway outside Rosa's apartment door, to the tightening ache in his chest every time he remembered the look on her face when she told him to walk away. He had never felt helpless like this before. In business, there was always a strategy, always a negotiation, always a way to push forward. But this losing Rosa, losing Ellie felt like losing breath, losing gravity, losing something he didn't know how to live without. After nearly a week of internal struggle, Landon realized something crucial. Rosa hadn't left because she didn't care about him. She left because she cared too much. She wanted to protect him, protect Ellie, protect the fragile line between their worlds. And she didn't believe he could fight for her without losing everything. But she didn't know who he was now. She didn't know what he had decided. She didn't know that Marcus no longer held the same power over him. He needed to tell her, not through rushed words or desperate pleas. He needed her to see the truth he'd discovered. He wasn't going to lose her because of the company. He was willing to lose the company because of them. Late one afternoon, after 3 hours of ignoring his inbox and staring blankly at a spreadsheet, Landon stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the office without explaining himself. His assistant called his name from down the hall, asking if he was heading to the meeting with investors. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He didn't care. He took a cab straight to Queens again, the city blurring past the window as he rehearsed what he wanted to say. But every version felt too small. How could he condense everything he felt, everything he refused to let go, into words that could reach Rosa's guarded heart? How could he convince her that she wasn't a burden, that Ellie wasn't a threat, that their presence in his life wasn't something he wanted to shut out, but something he needed? By the time he reached her building, his heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He climbed the stairs slowly, unable to shake the memory of the last time he stood at her door. His hand hovered over the wood for a moment before he knocked. When Rosa opened it, surprise washed over her face, followed by uncertainty, then a familiar pain she tried to hide. She stepped outside again, closing the door behind her just like before. "Landon," she whispered, breath uneven. "You can't keep coming here." "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. I'm here because I can't let things end like they did. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second before she forced herself to look away. We talked about this. You know why I left. I know why you think you had to leave, he corrected gently. But you were wrong about one thing. She frowned. About what? He drew in a steadying breath. About me. She looked at him, confused. He continued, you said I wouldn't protect myself, that I'd fight for you even if it cost me everything. You were right. I would. But you didn't give me the chance to show you that I'm not afraid of the fallout. I'm not afraid of Marcus. I'm not afraid of the board. The only thing I'm afraid of, his cracked slightly, is losing you. Rosa's breath trembled. She closed her eyes as though his words hurt more than they healed. Landon, she murmured, don't say things like that unless you mean them. Ivy never meant anything more. She opened her eyes again, struggling to hold his gaze. You don't understand the consequences. Marcus won't let this go. He'll come after your position. He'll drag the board into your personal life again. He'll twist everything he can. I know, Landon said, and I don't care. Her expression dropped into something raw fear mixed with longing. You worked your whole life for that company. And what good is any of it if I lose the first real connection I've had in years? He asked quietly. If I lose the only people who made this place feel like home. Tears gathered in Rosa's eyes, but she held them back stubbornly. You don't know what you're asking for. Ellie, she gets attached so easily. She loves you. She thinks the world of you. And if anything happens, if you change your mind, she'll break. I'm not going to change my mind. You might, Rosa whispered. People do. People get overwhelmed. People regret things. And I can't let my daughter be the one who pays the price. Landon stepped closer, so close she had to look up at him. Rosa, he said softly, I'm not people. The words hit her like a blow. She blinked, and a single tear finally slipped down her cheek. He reached up instinctively, thumb brushing the tear away with a gentleness that made her heart twist painfully. She didn't pull back. She didn't move at all. She stood in front of him, trembling, caught between wanting him and fearing him. He lowered his hand but kept his voice steady. Give me a chance to prove that I'm not walking away. Give me a chance to prove that what I feel isn't temporary. Give me a chance to show Ellie she didn't do anything wrong. Rosa pressed her lips together, overwhelmed. I don't know if I can. Just let me try, he whispered. If after that you still want me to walk away, I will. Her heart clenched. You promise? Landon swallowed. Yes. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty, any hesitation, any crack in his resolve. She found none. His sincerity was too deep, too raw, too real. And Rosa, who had built walls out of necessity, felt one of them crumble under the weight of his honesty. Before she could respond, Ellie's voice floated from inside. Mommy, is it Mr. Hale again? Rosa's breath hitched. She hesitated, then opened the door slightly. Ellie peeked out, her face lighting up the moment she saw him. You came back, she announced, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Landon knelt down, his heart swelling painfully at the sight of her joy. Yeah, he says with a soft smile. I came back. Ellie rushed forward and threw her arms around him again, and he wrapped her in an embrace that felt like coming home. Rosa watched them, her heart tugging in two directions, fear and hope colliding in her chest. When Ellie finally pulled back, she grabbed his hand eagerly. Do you want to see my new drawing? I made it this morning. Landon looked at Rosa before answering, not for permission but for reassurance. She didn't speak, but she didn't say no. And that was enough. He nodded. I'd love to. Ellie beamed and darted inside, leaving the door wide open. Rosa stood frozen, breath shaking, the decision weighing on her shoulders. Landon held out his hand, not demanding, not assuming, just offering a chance. A promise, a beginning. After a long moment, Rosa placed her hand in his. And for the first time since she walked away, something inside both of them finally exhaled. The story of Landon, Rosa, and Ellie is ultimately a lesson about the transformative power of human connection, how even the most unexpected relationships can illuminate the parts of ourselves we've kept locked away. Landon spent years building walls around his life, convinced that success, structure, and predictability were enough to make a life meaningful. He believed that achievements could replace companionship, that order could quiet loneliness, and that work could fill the spaces where love was meant to exist. But when Ellie wandered into his world with her crayons, her laughter, her innocent questions, she cracked open a part of him he had long forgotten. Her presence reminded him that joy doesn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect plans. It appears in small moments, often led by people who have no idea they're rechanging your life just by being themselves. And in Rosa, Landon found warmth, tenderness, and a strength that didn't look anything like the power he had grown accustomed to. She taught him that resilience isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and born from sacrifice. She showed him that vulnerability is not a weakness, but an act of courage, especially for someone who has had to fight for stability every day. Another lesson woven into this story is the danger of assumptions, how quickly people can judge others based on class status or circumstance. Marcus represents the voice of societal expectation, the cold logic that dismisses anything that doesn't align with power or profit. His reaction to Rosa and Ellie reveals how easy it is for those with influence to devalue the humanity of others simply because they do not fit neatly into their world. But Rosa and Ellie's presence in Landon's life demonstrates the opposite, that true worth has nothing to do with income, titles, or pedigree. It is found in kindness, loyalty, and the ability to see another person for who they truly are. Their story shows that people from different worlds can form connections that defy logic, and that those connections are often the most meaningful because they are rooted not in convenience, but in genuine care. Rosa's decision to walk away offers another powerful message. Sometimes love means choosing the harder path. She wasn't protecting herself, she was protecting her daughter, and ironically, protecting Landon too. She believed she was doing the right thing, even though it tore her apart. Her strength lies not in leaving easily, but in leaving when every part of her wanted to stay. The lesson here is that sacrifice is not always noble or glamorous. Sometimes it's quiet, painful, and misunderstood. But it is still an act of love. Rosa teaches us that boundaries matter, that loyalty to our loved ones can demand impossible choices, and that dignity often comes from knowing when to step back, even from something beautiful. Landon's journey, meanwhile, is about finding his voice, not the one used in boardrooms or negotiations, but the one that speaks for his own heart. He spent years letting others, especially Marcus, dictate the terms of his life. Yet when faced with losing Rosa and Ellie, he learned that choosing for himself is not an act of rebellion but an act of self-respect. His confrontation with Marcus is more than a fight between brothers, it's a moment of personal liberation. It shows that protecting what and who matters to us sometimes requires standing up to the people we love most. And it teaches us that independence isn't just about financial success or leadership roles. It's about claiming the right to build a life that reflects your own values, even when others disagree. Through Landon, we learn that growth often emerges from heartbreak, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Ellie, without even meaning to, embodies the purest lesson of all: love is simple until adults make it complicated. She doesn't care about wealth, reputation, or social divide. She cares about who makes her feel safe, who listens to her stories, who values her drawings, who shares their time with her. She reminds us that children see the best in people instinctively, without prejudice or calculation. And she teaches Landon and the readers that the truest connections are born from sincerity and innocence, not expectation. Her love is uncomplicated, unconditional, and transformative. She is the heart of the story because she represents the kind of trust and joy adults often forget to hold on to. Together, their story teaches that family is not defined by blood or background, but by the people who choose to show up, again and again, even when circumstances make it difficult. It teaches that healing often comes from places we least expect, from a child's laughter, from a woman's quiet strength, from a moment that seems accidental but turns out to be life-changing. It teaches that vulnerability is not something to fear, but something to embrace, because without it, we cannot truly love or be loved. And perhaps most importantly, the story teaches that love is not about perfection. It's about choosing someone even when the world tells you not to. It's about holding on to the people who make your life brighter. It's about fighting for what matters, even when the odds are stacked against you. In the end, the lesson is simple: the things that change us most are often the things we never planned for. Love enters our lives unexpectedly, reshapes them completely, and leaves us with a choice to retreat into what is safe or to step into what is real. Landon, Rosa, and Ellie show us what happens when we choose the latter. And through their journey, we are reminded that the most extraordinary transformations begin with the smallest moments of connection, courage, and the willingness to let someone into our hearts even when we are afraid. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.